Before you watch this episode of our City Current radio show, I want to invite you to join City Current's e-learning and online personal development platform called Growth Current. I'm Jeremy Park, host of the City Current radio show and CEO of City Current. Growth Current is your exclusive ticket to attend virtual events with global thought leaders, national guest speakers, and experts who can help you grow personally and professionally. It gives you access to success secrets, lessons learned, learning modules, and so much more. Being online, you can join us from anywhere in the world. Subscriptions are only $8 a month, or you can do bulk subscriptions for your team. Check out growthcurrent.com to learn more and to join us in our efforts to power the good. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the City Current Radio Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're honored to be with our next guest, Ben Cooley. He is the founder and CEO of Hope for Justice. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, doing wonderful, actually.
We're honored to have you on because you and your team are doing amazing good internationally as well as in Tennessee. So we'll talk about both aspects, but let's start on your end. Being the founder and CEO, give us a little backstory for founding the organization Hope for Justice.
Well, I started it. I was an opera singer at the time, Jeremy. When I was 25 years old, I used to wear tights and makeup and dance around, and then I heard about this issue of modern slavery. 27 million people caught in slavery, 1.2 million children a year sold, 2 children every minute. And I walked out that building that night and I thought, wow, if that was my daughter, I would do something. And it was the next thought that changed the course of my life. They are someone's daughter, I should do something. So I did what any young, passionate 25, 26-year-old would do. I booked an arena to tell people about it. And we got 5,884 people to our first event. And since then, the last 12 years, we've grown it to 11 countries, 32 offices, and we've helped over 102,000 children in our programs last year.
Wow. How do you define modern slavery? Because what's interesting is it's more than trafficking. And so talk about modern slavery and how you define it.
Well, I mean, we follow the Palermo Protocol, which is standard for here in America, which is human trafficking. But it takes 3 types of forms, in my opinion. It takes sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude. And, you know, we've rescued victims of sex trafficking here in the state of Tennessee. Just a few weeks ago, we rescued 6 women from a brothel that were being held against their will. Some of them are held up to 3 years, forced to service nearly 20 men a day sometimes. We've rescued people in forced labor. I don't know if you saw, but we broke down the largest gang in European history. That was on BBC, on Fox News, CNN, and other such things. And domestic servitude. In fact, we rescued someone here in America, in California, that was actually held in slavery for 37 years, and now is walking free because of Hope for Justice. So really, slavery takes many forms, organ harvesting and stuff, but the major 3 is sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude.
When you look at, on your end, the different aspects of what you do, give us a little bit of a kind of a teaser, if you will, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper, but it's prevention, it's rescue, restoration, and reform. So talk about those aspects.
Yeah, so we work with, to prevent exploitation, we work with vulnerable communities all over the world, whether that be women in Africa that economically are caught in poverty or lack of education. We work with them, their children. We run self-help groups and child protection clubs, community awareness packages. I mean, some of our community work has led to identification of 33 brothels in one slum in Uganda with children as young as 6 years old. We've worked with programming here in the United States with going into schools with the Nashville Predators to actually go in and bring awareness to the issue of human trafficking, preventing exploitation for children. I mean, we rescued someone just last week in Nashville that was a 16-year-old that was actually groomed by an online app, a game that they were playing. They thought they were meeting a friend that they'd connected with online. That friend was not their age. It was someone that was much older, kidnapped the child and took the child away. The police and Hope for Justice worked on that. We were able to get them back. So we try and bring awareness so that doesn't happen in the first place. That's prevention. Then we rescue victims. So I employ investigators from FBI, and other senior law enforcement backgrounds to identify victims of human trafficking. We've literally rescued thousands of individuals, children as young as 3 months old. Then we have Restore program, where we run short-term residential treatment centers for children that have been trafficked and identified as trafficking victims. We have trauma-informed care, psychosocial support. We have schools, reintegration projects. And then finally, we take all of what we've learned through prevention, all of what we've learned through identifying thousands of victims and restoring. We took over 2,000 children safely back to their parents in the last year with a 92% success rate. And we've learned what we've learned through all of those, through monitoring and evaluation. We then sit with governments. I was just a few weeks ago in the White House, sitting, recommending legislation, and then working with businesses to prevent exploitation happening in their supply chains.
Yeah, I think, like anything, there's no one answer. You have to work on so many different fronts to be able to take a very holistic view and approach to what you're doing to really create the change. Let's take a few of these and we'll dive in a little bit deeper. Talk about on your end where the tips come from. So in other words, when you're looking at hiring the investigators and really trying to find the victims and pull them out, where is that information starting? Is it coming from people saying, hey, I think there's something over here? Is it you just kind of doing what you do? Where does that magic start to happen?
Well, that's a great question, Jeremy, because 75% of the victims that we rescue globally are actually coming from people that we've trained. And that's people in faith communities, medical, people that are working and living in communities that notice something that doesn't seem right. And so they phone our offices, speak to one of our specialist investigators, and there it starts an investigation, which often can lead to a rescue. And, I can think of one case particularly where someone reported through to us just what the instance was that there was men that were being dropped off at a factory in a van, a minivan with no seats, and they were getting out at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were getting picked up at 11 p.m. and there was 15 in that van, and that led to an investigation which led to 33 people being rescued from forced labor. It's things like that, that actually make the difference. So what I always say to people is get informed. Go on to hopeforjustice.org. We've got a lot of information on there that's saying what can you do to spot the signs of human trafficking and get involved, because it's when we all get involved that we can actually do something. Yeah,
and then dive in a little bit deeper on the reform side, because one of the keys to stopping this is shutting down the commerce, like the business. So in other words, there is a business of this, and it's changing the laws, especially in other countries, and sharing best practices so that you can really lock down what's going on. And share a little bit about kind of the reform side and kind of the legal piece of this and what you're doing there.
Yeah, there's three things that I'm recommending federally for the United States, which is one, a national referral mechanism, which is basically a centralized data system that can that gets all of the agencies talking so that we actually know what the problem is. I mean, if you travel around the United States, many people say, well, this place is, Atlanta is the worst place, or Memphis is the worst place, or because of the intersections. And, the reality is we don't know. And so we should know. So let's put our resource behind a centralized data system that we can actually start attacking the issues because we know what the issues are. Second thing that I'm recommending is a federal aftercare system, because ultimately victim care is intrinsically linked to prosecutions. And if we want to see this really end, we have to actually send messages to traffickers that this crime won't be tolerated. And the third thing that I'm recommending is supply chains, is that businesses are held accountable for their supply chains. Would you believe it? That, we all love our phones and our mobile devices, but a lot of the world's cobalt comes from Congo, the DRC, which has some of the worst exploitation of children. And what I believe is I'm a firm capitalist. You might hear my accent and think because I'm from England, I'm a socialist. I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist. But I have the word compassion in front of that. I'm a compassionate capitalist, which means I want people to make as much money as they can, but not on the backs of slaves across the world. And so therefore, I want businesses to be upstanding and to protect children within our supply chains and make sure that modern slavery does not exist. And we have set up a subsidiary company called Slave Free Alliance to help businesses do that. And we have 9 of the FTSE 100 companies. We have companies like Virgin, Aldi, we have companies like Experian, Aviva, some of the largest companies in the world that are now signing up to actually end slavery in their supply chains.
How has the pandemic affected modern slavery and your efforts? And talk about what the pandemic has meant on your end.
Well, it's devastating. I can't tell you how devastating it has been, Jeremy, because ultimately, you know, we were dealing with vulnerable people. I mean, the number one common denominator behind the thousands of victims that we've helped is vulnerability. And if you look at how the government, there's 3 stages to a pandemic. Number 1 is the virus, actually fighting the viruses. And a lot of the governments across the world have been focusing on that. That's why they've been doing implementation of lockdown and looking at healthcare systems and capacity issues within the healthcare systems. The second stage to the virus is actually the economic impact. You know, I was with the John Richmond, who's the ambassador to human trafficking for the United States. He said 250 million people have been, in the first few months, were shoved into abstract poverty because of lockdown, because of the implementations on supply chains. Now, the UN say 1 billion people have lost their jobs in temporary work. And then the third then impact is onto supply chains and food management. UNICEF say 12,000 people extra a day now are dying from starvation. Hope for Justice, I have offices in Ethiopia and Uganda, and for the first time in history on our risk register, we have access to food because Uganda and Ethiopia work on a 90-day harvest. They haven't been allowed to go out for the first time to address a pandemic. And so they haven't been able to harvest their crops, therefore they can't sow, and they've got food poverty. You've got places around the world now, local governments that are banning human rights legislation for up to 3 years to get businesses back to production. And we're literally facing an economic crisis and vulnerability crisis across the world. And how now, as an anti-slavery organization, anti-human trafficking organization, which, by the way, this industry, the charity industry, is predicting a 40% drop in its actual income. So the need is greater. Billions of people that have been shoved into poverty, lack of jobs, law that isn't protecting them, rule of law, and access to food. So you've got more vulnerability and less resource to fight the issue. It's looking like dark times for the abolition of the slave trade. Thank God there are good people that are listening right now, that are rising up, that are listening to this and going, well, I want to do something. And I often say to people when they say, well, I want to do something, I don't know if what I can do will make a big enough difference. One of my favorite quotes is, no one raindrop ever felt responsible for the flood. And if we can all be that raindrop, we can send a flood of hope across our country, across the world, and across the nations.
Well, that's a perfect segue into how do we help? So obviously, as you mentioned, financial contributions being down, that's an easy way for us to help, is the financial contributions to underwrite your efforts. But talk about some of the different ways that we can help, especially for those in Memphis and in Nashville and various parts of Tennessee and the U.S.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, we do operations in the whole of the state of Tennessee. So one of the things I would say is get trained. Second thing is get informed. Third thing is get given. And fourth is that you can volunteer. And if you get in touch with our team, we'd love to help plug you in, because it's when we all do something. And many people say to me, Jeremy, they say, hey, Ben, you know, like, I love your passion for the abolition of the slave trade, right? I'm there with you, you know, but what you're trying to do, ending slavery, it's impossible. It's impossible. And, you know, I love the words of Muhammad Ali that say impossible is just a big word thrown around by small-minded men who find it easier to live in a world that they've been given, rather to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. Impossible is a dare. Jeremy, I am in front right now. You can see it. If you're listening on the radio, you might not be able to see this, but I'm in front of something called the Freedom Wall. And many people told me when I started the organization it will be impossible to change and get people out of slavery. Impossible. But I'm in front of a freedom wall, and every time we get a rescue, we stick an open padlock representing that life that has been changed, that life that is now no longer in slavery. We've put thousands of padlocks across this America. We've put thousands of padlocks across Africa and Southeast Asia. And now we're going to do more. This pandemic is not going to stop us, hinder us, harm us. We're going to keep on going until all are free.
I love it. Wrap up with website, social media, contact information. Where do we go to get involved?
Okay, well, you can go into hopeforjustice.org and you can follow us on Hope for Justice, INT, I think it is, on Instagram. But if you just search it all, and if you wanted to give me a message, I'm on @Ben Cooley, that's COOLEY, and you can get in touch with me, and I'd love to talk about how we can end slavery together.
Yeah, so hopeforjustice.org, hopeforjustice.org is the website, and all over social media as well. So Ben, greatly appreciate all you and your team are doing. Thank you very much for being a part of the show.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. My pleasure.